I've had this garden for about 4 years now, and in that entire time, I've never had a proper garden plan. What I mean by that is I don't have anywhere to reference which bed is which, where I've planted what, and how much of everything I'm growing. So in this video today, we are going to be taking this entire garden, everything you see before you and more, and digitize it into a proper garden plan. I am going to be using pencil and paper to draw out the rough schematics, but we are not doing a paper plan because that is just an easy way to get frustrated, to get messy, you lose them. And I've tried Excel before and it's just really not for me. So today we're going to be using the Epic Garden Planner. It's full of all sorts of really cool features, and I'm so excited to finally find something that is worth my time when it comes to planting the garden. We're gonna start this by measuring all of the raised beds first and work our way out. But first, let's go inside and set up our base plan. The first thing we're going to do is go to epicgardening.com, and then in the top right, you should see a green bar that says Garden Planner. I'm gonna go ahead and click on that. And I already have an account, so I don't need to create one. But what I could do now is click on this Garden Planner section. There's also the journal, which maybe we'll touch on later if you wanna start your own digital garden journal. And so what we're going to do here, you'll see I have no plans. So what I want to do here is create a new plan. Now we are going to be doing a blank plan, but I do want to show you guys this other section where there's sample plans. So what you can see here is there's a beginner garden, a salad garden, low maintenance herb, feed your family, whatever it is. There's a lot of different pre-built gardens. So if I just select one of these, like the beginner one, I could hit create plan. And what it'll do is it'll pre-populate a simple 4 beds, 4x8s, 4 of them total, with everything planted out where you could see the rows, the spacing, what plants go where. You could even include a trellis like this bean trellis here, which is pretty nifty. So this is sort of what we're working towards. Ours is going to be a little bit more complex since my garden is bigger and not as square. So let's get out of this and we'll go ahead and make a new plan. So blank plan, I'm not going to create it from a follow-up plan. Instead, I'm going to call it the North Garden. That's how I refer to that part. I'm going to do it in Imperial, and I don't know the dimensions. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just make it 50 by 50. I know that it's definitely not 50 by 50 out there, and you could always change the dimensions of the total plan later. So hit create plan, and there we go. Now we've got our big old grid, and we could basically go start measuring. So what I've done is I have this little notepad here that is graph paper. You don't need to use graph paper, but it will make it a little bit easier to put reference points. So I have 0, 0, and now what we're going to do is add in all of our raised beds, which should be here all the way down. So let's go out to the garden. When trying to digitize a big, weird space like this where things aren't in straight lines, I don't even have sharp corners anywhere in this garden. The only thing I have to reference is this wall. So this is my one straight line here that I could base everything else off of. And the important thing here to consider is that I am not trying to be exact. I don't suggest that you try to be exact. The only thing I'm trying to get really exact, I guess, is the size of the planting area I have. Anything in between, like pathways or spaces, I don't care at all if they're true or accurate or even really that relatively correct to everything else going on. I really only care about the true growing space. So what you see here is that I have this 3-in-1 peach. That is essentially the furthest back thing in my garden. So what I'm going to do is use this post here as a reference point and say that this is essentially the back section of my garden and move forward from there. So if I start with that in mind, I can measure from here to here, and I could see that this raised bed starts 4 feet from the edge. So what I'm going to do here is, I'll show you what this looks like in a moment, but I'm going to just offset from this wall 1 foot. I'm going to put a point 4 feet in, and that's going to be the first corner of my bed. So now I could take this, measure it out, it's 4 by 4. So it's very simple to now go through and add the rest of my points. So now I've got my first raised bed in. Let me add in the second, and then I'll show you guys what it looks like. So right there you can see I'm not trying to do anything crazy accurate. I have my first wood bed there, which is the 4x4, and then right beneath it I've got the 4x3. The peach tree is going to be somewhere up here, but we'll work on that after. I first want to get this line of raised beds. So I'm going to work my way down, measure it all, and then I'll meet you at the computer. So I've got my points on this spreadsheet here, this little graph paper. So now what we need to do is start entering in all these beds. So what I'm going to do here is I'm on the plan and I want to go down to, I think it is objects, and we're going to go to layout, which would be your beds. And what I want to do is start with the wooden bed. So I've got raised beds here. I'm going to hit wood. And then that way I could just drop it onto my point. So the first point here is 1 foot from the edge, 4 feet down. So there is a scale on here. So I'll go 1 foot from the edge, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll place it right there. And now here's the cool thing is when you want to change the dimensions of this bed, you have two options. You could either just drag it out like this until you get as close to 4 as you can. But if that feels a little bit too annoying, then don't worry, because you could do this instead. So I'm gonna zoom in a little bit. You could double click on the bed, and then you have your inside height, inside width. And so what we wanna do here is change this to be a nice even number. So I'm gonna do 4 feet by 4 and 0 inches. So what this will do now is it'll create a 4 by 4 raised bed. Now I wanna make sure again that this is on the right point. So 4 feet down, and that's perfect. So now what we need to do is add in the rest of the birdies beds. Now these are pre-built in here, which will make it very easy. So I know that first bed, which is a 3 by 4, is a birdie small. So I'll click on that, go ahead and drop that in. And each bed, whether it's true or not with the tape measure, is set 2 feet apart. That is how I'm going to make it easy for me to actually figure out where everything is. So this is the 4 by 3, but I need to rotate it by 90 degrees. So that it is facing the right way. There we go. So we're off to the races now. I've got 2 beds in. Let's go ahead and get the rest of these in, and then I'll talk about the peach tree and the hugelkultur bed, which I also decided to add in. So now at this point, I have all of my major raised beds that are up against the wall entered in. And remember, I don't think it actually is important that you worry about exactly where your paths are, because that's not going to help you actually figure out what you're growing. The most important thing is the actual dimensions of your growing space, which is what these raised beds are. Now, if you want to add something like the hugelkultur bed, what we're going to do here is go to shapes. I'm going to be adding in a rectangle because that is the shape of that hugelkultur bed that I have there. So 2 feet away from the other one, and it is 3 by 6. And then the last thing I need to add is actually the 3-in-1 peach tree. Now, here's how we're going to do this. I'm going to look for fruit tree. You could just look for the peach if you want, but I'm going to go ahead and enter it in manually so I can put all the details that I want. And then it's 3 feet back from that bed. So I'm going to step back. It's basically on the edge of this garden plan here. And then what I'm going to do is double click on this. So the radius that's on there, from my understanding, the gray circle is supposed to denote the root zone of a tree. Of course, that is a more mature tree. So what I'm going to do is hit customize varieties here. I'm going to add a new one. I'm going to call it a 3-in-1 peach. And then what I'm going to do here is have custom spacing. I don't want this to take up the entire space with the root zone, so I'm going to change it to be 36 inches instead of 118. Save all changes, hit done, and there we go. Now we've got the tree that is more appropriately shaped, or sized I should say, and we're gonna move that right where it is. So now we have a good starting point. We basically have all of the raised beds in. Now we need to go back in and add all of those other in-ground beds. And if we have space here, I'd actually also like to add the greenhouse. So let's get out there and do a little bit more measuring. So we're out here in the garden and I'm next to the hugelkultur bed and the peach tree that we just entered. So the first thing I'm going to do here is figure out the distance from the hugel bed to my in-ground bed, which is again, 2 feet. And now I want to figure out the overall dimensions of this huge planting area. So I'm going to get the tape measure out. And remember, you could be as exact as you want. I have no intentions of being exact here today. I just want to get a good sense for what my garden actually looks like. So this is 11 feet across. And now what I'm going to do is measure the width, then the distance to the greenhouse. And from that point, I'm going to start working my way down through the garden, measuring the pollinator patch, the next 2 in-ground beds, the teepee, the no-dig garden, and everything else in between. So this is the last measurement for this bed. And we're looking at something that's roughly 11 by 9 feet. And then now I'm just gonna figure out the distance to the greenhouse. So here are all of the measurements. You could see that there's nothing fancy. It almost looks like just scribble on here, but I assure you there are real numbers on this. I did run out of some space here, so I put some notes like pathways 3 feet, then the greenhouse is another 2 feet. I already know the dimensions of the greenhouse. So let's just try to get this entered in. So now basically the last thing that we have to add is my big ol' hugelkultur bed, or not hugelkultur, my no-dig bed. That one is going to be interesting to figure out because it's not a straight shape. It's actually a weird shape. I wonder if you could connect the lines if I did like one line. Can I add another one to that? Oh, okay. So I can curve this line, which actually helps quite a bit. So what we'll do is we'll just make our own curved bed captured by this line here. So I could actually, oh wow, that's actually pretty nice. I could pin that to wherever I want and then stretch this out to wherever I'd like. Okay, so that's actually working a lot better than I thought. And if I look outside, looks like my bed ends right about there. And then what we'll do is we'll just add lines to connect these dots. All right, so what do we have? What we've got on here is essentially the bulk of my garden. I have all of my raised beds here on the left side. I've got all my in-ground beds here, which are drawn in blue. And then I've got the greenhouse on the edge. So what we need to do now is I need to figure out how to populate some plants. Last time we saw each other, I had measured out the garden and entered in all of the beds so they are accurately reflecting my true space. Now that we have them all entered, we want to do something very important here, which is to click the selection tool and then select everything that you've just put down, because this is all essentially permanent infrastructure. And then we're gonna go up here to layout and hit lock selected items. What that does is now I can't accidentally move any of these things as I'm messing around and adding plants. It's just going to make our lives much, much easier. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention really quickly is that I have this brown square with posts. That is to signify a wooden raised bed. I have this brown rectangle here, which is just a weird way to say that that's something different, which is my hugelkultur bed. And then in green, accurately matching my birdies beds, are all of the birdies beds. So I have a couple wooden raised beds down here, and then everything that's in blue is what I chose as the color to represent my in-ground beds. You can make that whatever color you want. I decided to do blue because it should stand out very, very clearly. Now that everything is locked in, let's take a look at our first plant. And this is actually something I tried to do earlier, and I ran into something a little bit weird. So let's go ahead and pop this tomato in. If I double click on that, I could see that it has my harvest date, my sow and plant date, and my sow indoors date. Now, if I look at this, this looks really weird to me. I am not just harvesting tomatoes from, what is this? Looks like April through May and June. That's not accurate for me here in San Diego. So we need to take a look at what the settings are for the location that I'm listed in. So let's exit out of this tomato plant. We'll come back to it when we're truly adding stuff. And now we're going to go to the dashboard. So on the left here, if you click on overview, you'll come back to this section. And now what we're going to do is actually look at our account. So in the bottom left, actually we could have gone straight there, is the account button. I'm gonna hit that. And then it's taking me to location and frost dates. So this is the thing where it's really going to make a big difference on what the settings are for the area that you live in. So I just have it set to general San Diego because I don't need you guys to know exactly where I live. So I'm gonna hit search, San Diego, that's where it's showing. And when I scroll down here, what it says is that I have no frost in my area. That's basically true. And then I have a split season. Now this is one of the things that commonly gets misconstrued about San Diego. It's not the planner's fault, but San Diego is often considered to be a very warm area because it is in zone 10B. But if we know anything about zones, we know that zones aren't actually telling you about the climate, they're just telling you about the extreme cold end of the season. So what I'm going to do here instead is go to manual frost dates, and I'm going to make this more rooted in reality for me. So I'm going to uncheck the box that says my area does not experience frost, because technically we do get a very light frost sometime in January. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set February 1st. This is one of those things where if you live in a weird zone like San Diego, you have to just make up your own frost date. So I'm going to select February 1st, and then we'll go ahead and leave December 31st as our last frost or first frost date. And then what I'm going to uncheck is split growing season. This is where if you're in a split growing season, you're probably like Texas or Florida, where you can't actually grow your summer crops in the true summer, but you have to grow them in the shoulder seasons. So people in Florida don't grow their tomatoes outside in July, they grow them outside in the fall. So now that we have our frost date actually set, what I'm going to do is go back to overview, and I'm going to hit refresh. That's just to ensure that those changes we put in there is reflected in the actual planner. It's going to reload everything. And then now what I could do is go to the North Garden. And now it'll load up again since we just hit refresh. And let's try adding that tomato again. Let's actually remove this one that we had earlier. So tomato, click, drop, and then I'm going to double click on that. There we go. So now if you take a look at this, you'll see what the true season is for San Diego, which is basically that I could do whatever I want with my tomatoes here. It's saying that from mid-February up and through June, essentially, I could plant my tomatoes outside, and that's actually true for me here in San Diego. It's even showing that I could harvest my tomatoes as early as March, and that's a little bit optimistic. It is possible. I do have some tomatoes that I'm harvesting in my greenhouse, but overall, this is now reflecting a much more accurate representation of my climate. If anything, I could even move that frost date to the beginning of March instead, just to give myself a more normal planting window, but this should do just fine. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. Let's go ahead and remove this tomato. What I'm going to do right now is enter some of the stuff that's already growing in this bed. So for example, I have some cabbages, and I know that I have 4 of these. So let's see what happens when I drag this out. Okay, in this case, it actually got my spacing as I actually truly have it. 4 plants fit in this section for me. So I'm going to just leave that as it is. And the other thing you'll see is that there's this bounding box that's drawn around the plant. That is to represent the sort of spread of the plant. Now, if you don't like that, if you don't think it's accurate for the variety that you're growing, my favorite thing about this is that you could fully customize this variety. So you could choose it from a drop-down list like here, or you could just go ahead and add your own custom variety. So I think this is called like farro cabbage, I think. I'm not entirely sure, but let's just go ahead and say that. Then I'm going to hit customize varieties, and this is where things get, for me, super interesting. This is where you could entirely change the spacing to match the reality that you have. You could even change the custom timing of your planting window. So for example, if I think I can't plant this out in March, I could uncheck those boxes, or more realistically, I could uncheck like August, because I'm probably not planting cabbage in August. It'll probably be closer to September. So what do I do now? Well, I have this all set up, and I could now change the spacing out. So let's say I wanted to put not 30 inches between plants, but like 24. I could go ahead and just hit that. So I could hit done, save all changes, come down here to done, and nothing really changed because in that same space, it's still 4 cabbages. So the other thing we could do though, is once we have that actually set up in there, is I want to change the in-ground dates. So I already know that I put this cabbage out sometime in February, so I'll hit February. I'm expecting to harvest this sometime towards the end of April. So what I'm going to say is that it's in ground through April, so it has 1 more month in the ground, and then I'm going to hit done. And now let's go ahead and add the onions that I also have in that bed. And I'll skip ahead at some point once I show you guys this basic feature over here and show you what my complete setup looks like. But for now, I really want to show you guys this seasonal sort of use case, because this is where, to me, it gets super fascinating and useful. Because as I said, I need to figure out where the heck I'm putting my tomatoes. So let's go ahead and click on these onions. I'm not going to mess with the spacing at all, because I don't care if the number in here is accurate to how many onions I have out there. I know I did about 6-inch spacing. Actually, this is 6-inch spacing, so I don't need to change anything. So the only thing I want to do here though, is I actually want to change the in-ground dates. So I'll leave it as January is when I put them in. I think that's accurate. And my expectation here is that these onions should be ready around May. So I'm going to hit May. And now let's take a look at this planner. Right now, I only put a few things into it, but if you take a look up here at timeline, right now it says all months. But if I hit this side arrow, it'll go to January. And so see what happened is that that cabbage disappeared. So let's take a look at why that might have disappeared. And it's because I said that I put it in February. So now what I need to do is I'll delete this one. And these are the same cabbages. The only difference actually is that I'll keep the variety name, but this one actually I did plant earlier. So those cabbages are bigger, so I'll put January. And now what I'll do is I'll click through these months. So if I click next, January, those cabbages weren't there. That's true. If I click next again, the cabbages show up. So now we're in February, we're in March, they're just hanging out. And now we're in April, and the cabbages should be finishing up at the end of this month. So if I click next into May, you'll see that all the cabbages disappeared. The onions are still there because they have to finish maturing in May. But if I click through June, now everything is gone. So how am I going to use this to my advantage? Well, I want to say that I can't put my tomatoes in there now, but I can plan on putting some tomatoes in once April is done. So if I go to tomatoes, I'll do large. And what I'll say is that I could go ahead and plant these tomatoes behind my cabbages. And this is one of the cool things about the way that I garden is that I don't really have specific rules or timing windows. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to plant my tomatoes directly in the pathways around my cabbages. So let's go ahead and specify that. I'm not going to do it right now, but I will do it at some point in April. And I'm going to leave these tomatoes in there until December. That's totally accurate for me. I do want to check the spacing here. Looks like 24 inches. That's what I exactly plan on doing here. So I don't need to change any of that. So let's hit save. And now I'm going to delete that other one because I'd made changes to this. So copy, you could do Control C, Control V to paste. And now I know that I could put my tomatoes right there. So let's do one more row. These guys, you know what? I don't think I could get away with planting them next to the onions while growing the tomatoes actively, because at the end of the onions growing season, you don't want to actually water them. You want to let them dry down. So instead of this tomato going in April, I'm going to set it up to go in for May. So let's do that. So now, if I scroll through here again, we're in March. Now it's hitting April, the 2 tomatoes show up. Then we hit May, the cabbages disappear, those last tomatoes start to show up. And then as May is gone, the onions disappear, and now we just have the tomatoes left. So that is exactly how I plan on using this planner to actually make sure that I have proper space for my tomatoes. So what I want to do now is go through, enter a bunch of the plants that I already have, and then I'll check back with you guys and show you what I did and how I'm going to use this to actually create my succession sowing and master plan overall for where I just put everything in the garden. So let's take a look at everything I've already entered into the planner, and let's start it off in the month of February. So if I click forward into March, what you'll see is that a couple things changed here. Some potatoes showed up because I did plant those in March, some bush beans down in the bottom left here. I have some cauliflower, some lettuce, some tomatoes, and you can see actually that I've labeled them Glacier. So that is the specific variety. If you don't like that, for example, right now the lettuce is sitting on top of my tomatoes, I could right click, bring to front, and now that tomato's up in front and center. So now let's zoom back out. I've also put some pole beans on the trellis here, 8 of them because I have 8 poles. And if we go forward one more month, now things are starting to really change. So we're hitting April, boom, tomatoes show up, lettuce shows up, eggplant over here, tomatoes in the back bed. And down here, what I find really interesting is that you could enter the custom spacing that you plant for your peppers. In this case, I have them 12 inches apart. So when I draw that box out to my area, it tells me exactly how many peppers I could fit in there. So 26 in this bed, also 26, and I've decided that I'm also going to entirely fill these beds with peppers because this is the year of peppers for me. So 16 each in the 4x4s. And then if I come down here, you'll see that I also have zucchini showing up in April. That is when I would start to plant out my summer squash. Let's go forward another month. Now you'll see that winter squash, melons, watermelons show up. Furthermore, you'll now going to see that 3rd row of tomatoes appear where the onions are. And if I go forward one more month, what you'll also notice, let me zoom in so you can take a look at this, is look at this lettuce over here. What I've done is I've programmed it to grow from April to June. So if I hit forward one month, it's now June. It's showing a second band of lettuce because that is my succession sowing. So if I click on the back band, it's June to August. So if I go forward one more month, the first one will disappear, the second one is now there because I've harvested out all of that lettuce and now I've put in the new lettuce. Likewise, all of the onions have disappeared from the eggplant bed, from down here in the tomato bed. The potatoes have been harvested at this point, so I still need to figure out what to put there. If I scroll down to the very bottom, you'll see the cucumbers are starting to show up because it is now May or into June and it's now warm enough to have those. The garlic is fully gone in July and some tomatoes appear. You'll notice that the cauliflower is gone from the bottom bed and there is still lettuce because I have a second succession. My tomatoes are gone because those were a determinate tomato, the Glacier tomato, so it's not going to produce forever. It should be done around July. And now I just have to figure out where I'm going to put everything else. So this is the basic idea. Whether I'm going to stick to this exactly, probably not, but for the general idea, this is exactly solving my problem of figuring out how many tomatoes I could possibly fit in the garden. So we could advance more and you'll start to see some other things disappear and change. I just haven't gone that far out, but what I want to do now is take you to the plant list. So if I hit plant list, you'll see that I have all the quantities of the plants that I have. Whatever is planned, I have the 128 garlic in the bed, all of these onions, my tomatoes, I'm up to 24. So now if I go to the left here and click that little arrow, I could expand it and see where all my tomatoes are, and it also has all of the dates there. So what I could do here is I could click expand all, and you'll see that everything that I've added is individually showing up with the date and everything you need to know. So if I go to lettuce, for example, you'll see that it's quite complicated because I have multiple successions planned. I have May to July, March to May, April to June, and all of this is showing up in this right here. So what's really neat as well is that you could do individual plantings if you want, and you can see the calendar on the left. You can even edit these calendars if you really choose to. And here's where it gets also very interesting is I could click print. So if I go up here to print, what I could do is I could literally print out all of the plants that I have planned, see the dates, and actually figure out when to start my seeds. It's time for an update on the garden planner because it's been 2 weeks and we have our reminder email. So every 2 weeks you'll get one of these emails that is based on what you've actually put into your garden planner. So I just search for garden planner, that's how I find them. There's generally an article there that's relevant to the time period you're in, but if you scroll down, you'll get down to your planting list. Now, the way that I would use this is to think about it as reminders on what you should or can succession sow, or what you can and should plant out in the garden. So everything that I've put out there is essentially fair game because we're in the tail end of April. So all of these plants, according to our actual climate and our location, should be okay to plant right now. So if we look at this, for example, you'll see things like beans, the cabbages that we already have out there, the cucumbers, which is actually something I did plant, eggplant still need to plant, and of course fruit trees, they're totally fine to plant at this point in the year where I am. And some reminders to do things like my melons and my winter squash, which I actually have not started seeds for. So this week, my plan is to start seeds for any melons, watermelons, and winter squash. And then the tomatoes have mostly been planted out at this point. We'll take a look at those. And onions, I'm not planting any more onions at this point in the year. So what we want to do now is go out into the garden, take a look at what I did do, and then come back to the garden planner and update it with those changes. So here we are out in the garden, and as you could tell, it definitely looks different from the last time we saw it. It's been actually quite a while since I originally set up this video, probably about a month now. So if we take a look around, things have definitely grown in. Things that are planted that were not planted before. This was, I believe, all broccoli and brassicas before, and this is according to plan. So I have my row of tomatoes back here, should be 6 tomatoes, and then I have all of my peppers here in 2 rows. So let's check to see if we actually met how many are planted here based on what's in the planner. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times 2. So 24 peppers in 2 rows here. But the other thing that I actually haven't included in the planner is I have lettuce interplanted between every single one of these peppers and also between the pepper and tomato row. The last thing that I've added in that's not in the planner as well is that every single one of the tomatoes has a French marigold planted at the base. So we'll go back through, we'll add these guys in. As for this bed over here, I did end up changing the plans because I moved some peppers around. So originally I had this all marked out as peppers. As you can see, there are now tomatoes in here. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then a 6th tomato there at the very end. And I'll probably still end up putting peppers in this front section, just like we did over here, but it is definitely tomatoes, so we want to make sure to update that. If we come out to the back here, this is according to plan. There are, let's see, 4 rows of peppers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 deep. So we got about 20 peppers in here, maybe a little bit more than I had in the plan. And you'll notice some of these are taller up front. These are the ones I started from seed this year. And the ones that look a little bit more sad in the back here are overwintered peppers. I've left them in the pot a little bit too long. They should bounce back just fine, but that's why they look a little different than the rest. Moving through, we've got all the potatoes in here, just as it is on the plan. I did sneak in some garlic, so if we really want to, we can add that into the plan as well. In the back here, I have the bush beans and the tomatoes, which is exactly to plan. So no changes necessary there. Onion beds are still here. This still needs to get planted with eggplant, and those are just about ready to go out in the garden now. The onions are growing along quite nicely, and this back section here, it is now free of most of the cabbages. There's the last couple there. So the idea is that according to plan, I need to put a row of tomatoes here and a row of tomatoes there. In the future, once the onions are done, we'll also add some over in that section. In terms of the rest of the garden, I think everything else is pretty much accurate. This bed still needs to get dealt with. It hasn't been removed. There's a lot of perennial stuff in here. Garlic is garlic as mentioned. And in the very back here, I believe I had this listed as cauliflower beds, and they are indeed cauliflower. So that's also a great thing to see. They're actually looking really good. So I'm very happy about that. And the last bed that we need to check on here is the bed back here that has lettuce. You can see I harvested out some of that yesterday. The glacier tomatoes are still looking really, really good. Cannot wait to try those out. I haven't grown them before. In terms of this trellised area, the only thing that's really gone in that is on the plan scheduled for May, which is just around the corner, are my cucumbers. So I have one over here, and I also have one over there. So now let's go back inside and take a look at our plan and see if we're even close. So here we are, I have the planner open, and right now I have it set to April. So up here in this timeline section, you can see I'm in April, and what I'm going to do is click into May. So boom, click once. The main thing that changes here are that the cucumbers did show up on the actual trellis there. The pole beans as well, I forgot to point those out, but those are actually up and starting to climb. And you'll notice that this big bed in the corner here is the one where I'm supposed to have that winter squash, melons, and watermelons. So I'm glad I had that reminder to start the seeds. Everything else really checks out. I've got the tomato and lettuce bed down here in the corner. I've got the cauliflower with the lettuce in the bottom left. Garlic bed, just as we stated. And now if we take a look at the beds in question, like the one with tomato and peppers, that's totally good. So we don't really need to change anything there. What we could do is I could pull up some lettuce. And in this case, I'm not even that worried about it being the specific right type of lettuce because it's not going to be in there long enough for me to really feel like that is worth worrying about. So let me just clean up for a second here. We'll zoom in on the bed in question. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just drag it out so that I have them in between each one of these peppers. So just like that, 12 plants, that sounds right to me. Then I'll copy and paste and do another one back here between the tomatoes and the peppers. Now, in my case, I was thinking about adding those marigolds, but really, what do I gain out of that? I guess I gain a little bit now that I think about it. I do gain a memory of what I did in the past. So rather than like trying to keep a handwritten journal, I could go back through into this planner every single year and see exactly how I did it and what I planted. So I'll come through, and what I'll do is I'll just manually select and plant these marigolds at the base of my tomato plants. Now we could go in, of course, and edit the timing, make sure they're accurate to when I put them in. But in this case, I'm actually not too worried about that. The main goal here is to know that I have that bed planted as such. So I'm also going to bring the tomatoes to the front here, and we're also going to remove some of these labels because frankly, I don't need to see it that many times. The only reason it came up that much is because I added them as individuals. So now we have that bed planted out, peppers, lettuce, marigold, tomatoes. That's exactly what we have. Let's move on over to this other bed. And for now, I'm going to just do it as a single line of peppers. I haven't got in there yet to mess with the spacing, but I think that will most likely be accurate. So I'm going to copy and paste this tomato section here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then I actually do have a tomato planted out there that went into the ground in its own little spot. So I think for my value here, I want to specify when I put things in. So that is April. I'll leave it to December for now. I'll do the same for these tomatoes over here, which looks like that is good. So now this is accurate. I'm happy with that. Let's go ahead and zoom out. We do have the peppers in here. That's accurate. It says there's 16. And so let me see what the spacing is listed as. If we go to customize variables, it has it right now at 12 inches. And what I actually did in reality was 10 inches. So I'm going to go ahead and update that. Save all changes. Done. And now let's see. We've got, I think I just have to stretch it out a little bit more here. There we go. So now we've got the 20 peppers perfectly fitting that bed. I will most likely add some companions in between, but not right now. We could do some garlic since we know we have that planted around the potatoes as we took a look at earlier. So I'll do a row over here and then another row on the back here. So that way I just know for sure that my garlic is where I said it is. I have the bush beans and the tomatoes, that's all good. And here, since we're in May, which is actually next week, I do show that my tomatoes are planted with the lettuce, and that's totally fine because I actually have all of my tomato transplants ready as well as my lettuce. So this is right now feeling really good. I still have to do my other garden, which is actually behind me here. But for now, I'm very pleased with how this worked out in terms of actually laying out what I have in the ground in the garden at this moment. Now, moving forward, how am I going to be using this? Well, once I get the rest of these plants in the ground, like when I'm talking about the eggplant and those melons. At that point, the garden's really going to chill for probably a few months before any major changes happen. So what I'll try to do is I'll come through and make notes on, like, for example, this lettuce in here that's in my pepper bed. What I could do is come in here, put some notes, say like this lettuce bolted, and I could actually specify the dates that it was actually in the ground. So I'll do April, and I'll estimate that it'll be done by the end of May. So I can hit done. So by the time May is over, if I click one more, that lettuce disappears, which is exactly what I expect. So this will help me manage my turnover, my actual succession planting. I can now create a new lettuce to be planted for June. Actually, I'll just go ahead and do that now to show you guys. We could just copy paste, put it right on top, and double click. And instead of April to May, we'll do June to July. And I don't know if I will be able to pull off lettuce in that particular area. By then, the peppers will be big enough to provide plenty of shade. So we almost certainly could do it. So now if I click through, I will see that lettuce into July. Now, the other thing we could do here is, of course, set up our future fall garden. That's one of the things that I've always struggled to do in the moment. I want to make sure I get my seeds in on time. So towards the end of summer, I'll come back into this planner and I will start adding in all of the different brassicas and things that I want to plant out so that I know that I have them ready as seeds to transplant in the garden. And remember, if you continue to do this and you're diligent about it, you'll get those bi-weekly reminders every 2 weeks that tell you exactly what you already have planned and when you should put it out in the garden. So that should help serve as a reminder. But the thing I'm most excited for is, as I mentioned earlier, is having a record year to year. So even if I'm not using this to dictate my planning necessarily in the way like to remind me to do stuff, I will use this as a reminder of how I laid out my garden every single year so that I could reference it to know, did that work? Do I want to do things differently? Do I maybe want to try rotating things? That is what I see a lot of value for in this particular setup. So this is how you plan your garden. If you want to get granular and use an online tool like our garden planner here, I will definitely be putting links at the bottom, and we'll probably be covering this more because anytime I make a design for somebody else now, I'm going to do it in this app, share the planner with them, and if it's in a video in the future, for example, I'll also include a link to that plan so that you can also look at the plan as we show you it in the video itself. So thank you guys for watching. Hopefully this was helpful. Let me know if you still have any other questions. I, of course, am also a new user to this, but I have felt like it's quite powerful. And again, I still need to add my whole other section of the garden in. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.